let me preface a few things before getting into this video. I have sadly lost all of my footage due to a faulty hard drive, so some of the things I'll say may not correspond with the footage well. I apologize in advance. Massive thanks to Russ and Bren for generously allowing me to use their footage. This literally could not have happened without them. Links to their channel will be in the description. But without further ado, let's begin. In the year 1986, Japanese writer Aya Nishitani released his first ever novel, Digital Devil Story, Megami Tensei, or just DDS for short. The novel would later go on to receive an OVA based on the first volume, and 2 video game adaptations taking place after the second volume, the first of which was released for the MSX by Japanese company Telnet. This version is really nothing to write home about. It has around the same level of quality you'd find in most licensed games around the time, and by that I mean it was bad, and as such will not be getting its own video. Ever! Probably, I don't know. But while the MSX version didn't really break any new grounds, the same could absolutely not be said about the Famicom version, created by up-and-coming game developers Atlus. While most of Atlus's Western releases left a lot to be desired, many of them being published by LJN of all companies, take a second to process that. But no, they were far more well known in Japan for being the creators of the Famicom version of Megami Tensei, which picked up a lot of traction despite being a licensed game. It would later go on to receive a sequel in 1990, and in 1992, Atlus would go on to release their very own take on the concept, completely unconnected from the original novel, with Shin Megami Tensei, which would then go on to become their flagship series. Now Shin Megami Tensei, or Megaten, or SMT, whatever you want to call it, was never really the biggest or most well known of video game franchises, even in Japan. The series does have a crap ton of games and spin-offs, but the sales numbers are pretty average for the most part. However, while its following is far from the biggest, many of the SMT games are very well loved and critically praised, supporting an extremely dedicated following. Everything about SMT just radiates so much passion. I think that's one of the reasons I found myself so interested in the series. Passion is one thing I absolutely love, even if I don't get it. When I hear people talking about things that they genuinely adore, I can't help but just be happy. It is something I think drives most small fan bases, and is a large reason I am so immersed by them. I myself have never played any SMT game for the longest time. That was until the beginning of this very year, 2021, when I picked out a Megaten game on a complete whim, that game being Persona 4 Golden. Okay, so while the SMT series is still not that popular, the same could absolutely not be said about one of its sub-series, that of course being Persona. Since the late 2010s, the Persona series has been picking up a whole lot of traction, with Persona 5 especially being the talk of the town among many people. Nowadays, Persona is even more popular than SMT, despite it being a spin-off of it. Just think about that for a bit. That would be like if mainline Mario games were obscure and never talked about, but Mario Golf was actually the biggest series in the industry, and people say that this is the darkest timeline. While this large success was definitely a good thing for Atlus, I do also think it carried a bit of weight with it. You see, Persona is known for not having the most wholesome of fan bases. Now don't get me wrong, there are some absolutely amazing Persona fans out there, with a lot of the YouTube community especially being incredibly inspiring. But sadly, as always, the bad apples stick out way more than they reasonably should. And for that reason, along with it just generally being anime, I actually used to hold a bit of a grudge against Persona for the longest time, 5 in particular. But after a while, I did something unthinkable, something not even I could have saw coming. I actually played a Persona game and gave it a fair shot. I know, shocking. And man, these games are kinda stupid, but they were also so addicting and they basically took over my life for most of early 2021. I fully played through all 6 mainline games, but after I finished up with them, I kinda just moved on to other things, not really considering to embrace the rest of the massive Megaten series. There is a common saying SMT fans like to put towards Persona fans: play a real Shin Megami Tensei game. But for this video, I am going to one-up those people. I am going to be playing the Megami Tensei game, and if it turns out to be good, I'll make sure to bother those people by calling them fake fans, you know, so that I could feel slightly superior about myself. Just noting, please don't actually do that. Now, since this is my first time really delving into this series, and I actually want to enjoy the game, believe it or not, for this video, instead of the original Famicom version, I will be looking at its 1995 remake, featured on Megami Tensei The Old Testament for the Super Famicom, which contains both of the original Digital Devil Story games. Oh, and just a side note, from here on out, I'll be referring to the Famicom and Super Famicom as the NES and SNES respectively, mostly just due to me being more used to those names. Since most of these early SMT games are only ever released in Japan, I'll be using the English fan translation by DDS Translations. Any and all opinions I'll be giving will be directed at the SNES version, not the NES version. But enough rambling, let's finally get into this. Digital Devil Story, Megami Tensei. Akemi Nakajima, a high school programmer prodigy, created a demon summoning program. But believe it or not, that wasn't the brightest idea in the world, as the demons Loki and Zed gained physical bodies and assaulted Nakajima. But luckily for him, he was saved by the mysterious transfer student, Yumiko Shirasagi, who had the unexplained ability to use magic, which she utilized to repel the demons away. But of course, that wasn't all, as another, even greater demon was about to strike, which was Lucifer. Because of course it's freaking Lucifer, the angel who was cast into hell. Everybody knows the story by now. Lucifer is now attempting to take over the human world, because he's an asshole, as a demonic palace appeared in Asuka, which is also the location of the goddess Izanami's tomb. Lucifer has captured Izanami and sealed her within the palace. And so, it is the mission of Nakajima and Yumiko to enter the palace and stop the resurrected Loki and Set, as well as the great Lucifer once and for all. This opening is a very condensed summary of the events of the first two volumes, cutting down and retconning a lot of crucial details, such as Nakajima summoning Loki in order to get revenge on his bullies, as well as Yumiko actually being the reincarnation of the goddess Izanami, which is the namesake of the whole damn franchise, as Megami Tensei literally translates to reincarnation of the goddess. In the game, Izanami is still alive and well, which kinda defeats the purpose of the game's name, along with never explaining why Yumiko can use magic in the first place. I am critiquing DDS as its own game, not as an adaptation of the novels, and as its own thing, I sadly find it pretty weak. Now don't get me wrong, the OVA has plenty of issues, such as Nakajima being a hateable asshole who 3 AM prank calls fucking Loki, only because he got bullied. Now who the hell would bully someone who looks like this? But you know, at least the OVA had something. But the issues with the game's plot extend far beyond its opening. You see, this is what we like to call a static plot. The game begins with you going to kill Lucifer, and that's exactly where it ends. Most JRPGs are known for having dynamic plots, where the objective and goal keep altering to keep players invested. DDS's static plot and little to no character interaction keeps it relatively dull for most of its runtime. Nakajima and Yumiko are both completely silent, and any and all NPCs just give you gameplay hints instead of being actual characters. I know I'm being pretty harsh towards this plot, and some might argue that it's only an NES game and that I should have kept my expectations low. And to that, I say that Final Fantasy II came out on the NES only a year later, and the plot of that game blows anything DDS does out of the water. But at the end of the day, this is still a licensed video game. Heck, it even lets you rename Nakajima and Yumiko, despite the fact that both of them are still called by name in the opening. Atlus clearly didn't care for the plot that much, they just wanted to make a fun RPG here, so let's see if this RPG is indeed fun. Right off the bat, you'll notice one of the main things that made DDS unique, its presentation. While most RPGs, and heck, video games in general at the time, were played in a third-person perspective, DDS is played entirely in first-person. Whether it's Nakajima or Yumiko's POV, I'm not sure. They're literally together 24/7. But it is definitely a neat thing that sets the game apart. I do generally prefer games that are in third-person over first-person, but for this game, I don't mind it. Of course, 3D is kind of impossible to pull off on the NES, and is very rare to see on the SNES. So the game uses 2D images to give the illusion of 3D. and I think it actually looks very solid. The illusion comes off rather well, though to be frank, I did find my eyes glued to the minimap for basically the entire runtime. But on that note, this game has a map, and a very good one at that. It gives you the exact amount of info you need without giving away too much, and you can even zoom out to get an overview of the entire scope of the experience. I usually find myself using online maps when playing these sorts of games, so it's nice that DDS comes pre-installed with one. The only real issue with it is that you can only look at the floor you are currently on, no switching. We start off on the top of Daedalus Tower, which also serves as our first village. Many adventure games have you start near the bottom of a tower, which is also often the location of a town, but DDS quite literally flips that trope on its head, which is quite symbolic of the way Megaten operates. It still has the traditional JRPG elements, but it often throws its own spin in it to shake it up a bit, which I think is a major reason so many people adore it. This is where we'll encounter some good old NPCs. As I said, they only really give out gameplay tips, but hey, I guess at least having some characters is better than nothing. Though I do have to comment on how inconsistent their art style is. Like, these two don't look remotely like they came from the same game. NPCs are also not just limited to villages, they can occasionally be found deep into dungeons. It's weird but nothing I'll sleep over. Enough with this happy shit though, let's get into the tower and drag some crap. Oh yeah, now this is what I'm talking about. The Daedalus Tower theme is a banger and a half. It strikes a perfect mix between being catchy and atmospheric. Fantastic opening dungeon theme. The rest of the OST sadly never reaches that high for me, but it is still solid all around, with the battle themes doing their job as well. And speaking of battles, walking in these dungeons will often lead you into random encounters. And man, the encounter rate in this game is all over the place. Sometimes I'll have up to a minute without encountering a single enemy, but other times I'll encounter them only after getting a step off of a previous encounter. Here's my theory as to why this is. You see, most games with random encounters have this system where the more steps you take, the higher your chance to run into an encounter will be. But this number resets after every encounter. This is why you don't usually get comboed and run into encounters in rapid succession. I don't think DDS has a system like this, which would explain why the encounter rate is all over the place. You'd likely notice me saying a lot of stuff like I don't think or I guess when talking about the game's mechanics. And that's kinda just one of the many downsides of these games being as obscure as they are. Online info is very hard to come by, and is pretty minimal, along with the fact that the NES and SNES version have quite a few mechanical differences. Yeah, this video wasn't exactly the easiest to make, especially after my drive corrupted. But with that said, let's actually talk about these encounters. As you run into battles, demons will immediately show up. The screen doesn't black out and move you into a battle phase. Everything happens in the overworld, which I do like, but that also brings the downside of battles not being very visually interesting. You're just staring at the enemies, and I mean, the enemies all do look pretty solid. They are pulled from a variety of legends and religions. They're not still images either, they all rapidly cycle between two frames, which again gives them more life. Even if most of the animations just boil down to having the demons constantly blinking, and then this guy just goes Instead of getting right into battle like in most other JRPGs, you are given 4 options with an ominous backing piece. So let's start this off by doing what we all know best. Battling. The battle system in DDS is pretty standard for the time. You start off with 2 party members, Nakajima and Yumiko, each supporting their own pros and cons. Nakajima has his trusty comp, which you can use to do a variety of stuff. You could use it to look at the map, which, as I said earlier, is a godsend. Analyze any demon you come across. It lets you see their stats, which doesn't actually waste a turn, so it can be very useful if you want to formulate a strategy. You can access both of these anytime outside of battle by pressing a respective shoulder button, unless Nakajima's dead. And finally, it can reorder the party, using a computer. Alright. The closer to the front the party member is, the more likely they are to get hit. I usually just sorted my party by highest to lowest amount of max HP, which was serviceable. The computer can also perform one final very vital action, but let's come back to that later. For now, on to Yumiko. As stated in the intro, Yumiko can use magic, which costs MP. Yumiko learns better and more powerful spells as she levels up. Most of Yumiko's magic is supportive, but she does still get a few offensive spells here and there. As per usual, the better the spell, the more MP it consumes. However, Yumiko's best spell is one she actually has as soon as the game begins. The legendary, all-powerful Mapara! I know, there are spells that do insane amounts of damage, heal the entire party, but my favorite is the one that gives you a freaking minimap. But what can I say, I couldn't even think of playing this game without this minimap. The only thing that kinda sucks about it is that it goes away every new moon, making you have to recast it. And speaking of, that's another gameplay mechanic. You see those numbers at the top left of the screen? Well, that's not a calendar. What the numbers actually signify are the phases of the moon, which change as you walk around. This is a very whatever gameplay mechanic. The moon phase has little to no effect on the game whatsoever. Shops are closed on a new moon, for some reason. But other than that, I really don't get what the point of this system is. It doesn't really hurt the game, but I definitely wouldn't say it adds anything to it. But let's get back to the battle system. One thing I definitely have to praise would be the battle speed. All the JRPGs, I feel, are kinda notorious for their slow pace. Especially those on the PS1. It's something I know puts a lot of people off the genre entirely. And they can only really play them using fast forward options, which I have nothing against whatsoever, by the way. Nah, but here, the battles are lightning fast. The menus are snappy and each attack occurs in an instant. The animations themselves are not amazing, but I take fast battles with lame animations over slow battles with cool animations. And if the combat system was not fast enough for you, then you could even use auto battle, which has every party member constantly attack and speeds up the battles tremendously. It's like an in-game fast forward option, and the fact that such an old game had something this incredibly forward-thinking shows that DDS was in many ways pretty ahead of its time. It's a good thing the battles are fast, because you're going to be battling a lot. Now don't get me wrong, the battle system is by no means perfect. One of my biggest issues with it is the way it handles fighting multiple enemies. You could only run into one demon type at a time, but the amount of said demon can differ, signified by these little icons at the top of the screen. And I do like how these icons change depending on whether an enemy is almost dead or inflicted with a status condition. You could potentially be fighting up to 8 enemies at once. And this is where my issue comes in. When battling more than one enemy, there is absolutely no way to choose who you're targeting. Let me put it this way. Let's say you're currently battling 2 enemies. One of them is almost down, as signified by a red icon, and the other one is still at full health. Now, ideally, you'd want to finish up the one that's almost dead before taking care of the other one. You know, to minimize damage. However, whichever enemy you target is completely random, meaning you'll often get hit by enemies that are almost dead, even though it's not really your fault at all. I don't get why the game couldn't have had some kind of cursor that let you pick which enemy to target, because as it is, it feels like a pretty major oversight. Like in any good JRPG, winning battles rewards you with experience points, which level up Nakajima and Yumiko. Leveling up is awesome in DDS. Not only is it very frequent, but it also fully heals your HP and MP, which is especially good for Yumiko, as MP restoration is pretty scarce. But as for the stat increases, it's actually pretty minimal. Each level up only increases one of your stats by 1. But the cool thing is that you can pick whatever stats get boosted, which does add quite a bit of customization. Heck, you can even freely boost your stats by 15 at the start of the game. Now personally I do prefer when games just increase your stats for you, as I think requiring you to boost them just kinda adds unnecessary hassle and stress. But I wouldn't be surprised if I'm alone on that. And the leveling system is far from a deal breaker for me. Now everything up until now has been pretty standard stuff for JRPGs of the time. But now it's time to talk about what I think was the main thing that made Megaten stand out. And that would of course be demon negotiation. Instead of fighting demons, you could instead choose to talk to them. This gives you a few options, but your main goal here is to try and recruit the demon into your team so that you could use them as a party member. This was 9 years before Pokemon, let me remind you. While using demons as party members is definitely cool, I do feel that the negotiation aspect is pretty undercooked here. I was able to recruit practically any demon I wanted by simply just putting away my weapons, persuading them, and then just chucking a bunch of money at them to convince them to join me. Though they do sometimes rip you off and just run away with the money. But that occurrence is pretty rare. Most demons don't really have any character to speak of, and the way they act is determined entirely by their species. The main thing to keep in mind is that not every demon can be recruited. In fact, most of them can't be. Availability is determined by the demon's alliance, D&D style. Evil demons can't be recruited at all, and will just chip you out. Only neutral demons can actually be recruited, and good demons can only be acquired through fusion, which might just be the single most ingenious gameplay mechanic in the game. In many town-like areas, you will come across this place called the Cathedral of Shadows, where this strange old man will allow you to fuse two of your demons in order to get one stronger demon. Not every demon is compatible with one another, as signified by this chart that's kinda confusing, but it does start to make sense after a while. Fusing two non-compatible demons will just result in this lame-ass triad. You could also not fuse a demon that is higher level than Nakajima, not Yumiko. She doesn't matter here for some reason. Even though she's the one who uses magic, so you'd think her level should have determined it. But whatever. I guess Nakajima is the one with the comp. The reason fusion is such a brilliant gameplay mechanic is because it gives every demon you get a purpose. Demons don't level up like Nakajima and Yumiko, which means they fall behind and get pretty weak relatively quickly. Because you can only hold on to 7 demons at a time, you wouldn't want any weak ones taking up those slots. Especially since you can only have 4 of them out at once. But thanks to fusion, these weak demons always serve a role. These two guys might be worthless alone, but combining them could yield in a strong party member that will help you out in the next dungeon. Having to keep getting new demons also maintains variety. You are forced to switch up your party constantly, which helps in making the game less repetitive. It's cool having a team of 6 party members, which might be the most I have ever seen active together in a JRPG yet. I can only recall Final Fantasy IV as well as Personas 1 and 2 letting you have 5 party members out at once. But this is some next level stuff, man. 1987, it's the future! Megaten's demon collecting aspect is often compared to Pokemon, especially in the later games where elemental affinities are introduced. But I do think they are quite different. For one, in DDS, you can have multiple demons out at once, along with both main characters fighting alongside them. And 2, in Pokemon, the game tries to build a bond between the Pokemon and the players. In Megaten, the demons you get are literally just your tools. You use them for battling, and then you kill them to get a stronger demon. Also, Pokemon are animals, and demons are, well, yeah, you get the point. One of these is a lot crunchier than the other. But at the end of the day, none of that really matters, because Megaten isn't Pokemon, it's Megaten, and that's pretty cool. Much like Pokemon, I feel that Megaten is less about what you actually do in battle, and more about what your setup is. You get a lot of customization and possible playstyles, but the battles are less so about tactic, and more so about having a good party that's fit for the job. That's why it's nice that the battles are as fast as they are. You are doing a lot of the same stuff for a lot of them. And we sadly come into another issue here, the way you summon these demons. In order to summon demons, you have to use Nakajima's computer, so if he's down, no more demons for you. But for some weird reason, summoning demons costs money. Or Maka as it is called in this game. Freaking everything requires Maka. Want to buy items and equipment? Use Maka. Want to heal? Use Maka. Want to get new demons? Use Maka. And Maka is pretty damn hard to come by, especially early on where enemies barely drop any of it. In DDS, you are not grinding for levels, you are grinding for cold, hard cash. Like in real life, even after you get enough Maka to summon a demon. That is still not all. When you have demons out, they'll consume Magnetite, which I thought was magic for the longest time because it is simply abbreviated as Meg. The stronger the demon, the more Magnetite they eat up with each step you take. No Magnetite, no demons. This might sound like it would be really annoying and break the game's pacing to a screeching halt, but for the most part I found it a non-issue, as the enemies you encounter give you more than enough Magnetite to keep up with 4 demons, and I was keeping a net positive for the most part. Nevertheless, I think having to pay to summon demons and then keep feeding the magnetite to keep them up does come off as rather redundant. I already fairly acquired these guys, why do there need to be so many caveats here? This is something I can definitely see getting entirely cut further down the line, but for now, bleh. The opening dungeon of Daedalus Tower is a pretty brutal introduction. You need those extra demons to help you get to the bottom of it and defeat this Minotaur guy. You will die a lot, that's for sure. But believe it or not, I don't mind that. And this is where DDS really surprised me. After you die, instead of getting booted back to your last save point and losing a bunch of progress, you meet this dude called Charon who will offer to revive you, sending you back to the area where you last saved, but also retaining all of the progress you made. You do lose about half of the Maka you had, but that doesn't really matter when considering you keep all of the EXP and items you got, which is a literal godsend. Not losing your EXP means that no matter how many times you die, you are still always making progress. As you slowly climb down Daedalus, you are also slowly leveling up and getting the hang of the game's mechanics, until you finally reach Minotaur, and proceed to defeat him with a full party of demons you earned. And this is the best part. After you finish him off, you get access to Daedalus's elevator, letting you freely travel around the entirety of Daedalus at your leisure. This really gives the feeling of the dungeon being conquered. Rooms you previously had to slog through are now free for you to do whatever you want in. Enemies that previously halted you could now easily be defeated without them even getting a scratch on you. Above anything, Digital Devil Story absolutely nails the sense of progression, and does it in a well-earned way. Now that we are done with Daedalus, it is now time for us to move on to the game's second area, Valhalla. After spending so much time in Daedalus, it's very refreshing finally having some new areas with some new music. Even if the Daedalus theme is the best in the game, though I digress. But there is still a bit of a problem. The enemies of Valhalla are brutal, way stronger than anything you see in Daedalus. While this may initially seem like a pretty harsh difficulty spike, in reality there is a far smoother way to go about this. Completing a little side quest in Valhalla gives us access to the small floating city of Bien, which has been completely turned to stone. This optional dungeon is more than worth the effort. Not only does it get you up to speed with the enemies in Valhalla, but it also unlocks a lot of really cool things. The city's turned to stone, so what else can we do but beat the ever-living crud out of Medusa? Defeating Medusa unpetrifies the entire city of Bien. It's really the only time in the game where your actions actually directly affect the world, and while I would definitely love more of that, it only happening one time does make this occurrence quite memorable. We can now actually enter the city part of Bien, where we finally find another save point. You see, up until now, the only save point we had was at the top of Daedalus, which meant that every time you died in Bien, you were sent pretty far back. Now the elevator in Daedalus did make this less of an issue, but it did still ask you to make quite a long tedious walk. And that's why getting here is so satisfying. This is now your new starting point. There is essentially no reason to go back to Daedalus anymore. You are making tangible progress. The city of Bien is definitely the most robust in the game. It has a bar where you can talk to people, and nothing really comes of that, as well as minigames weirdly enough. Megaten is the last series I would take for having minigames, but here we are. These are mostly just luck-based and give you money, so I wouldn't bother and didn't bother. However, Bien is a floating city, and we have done quite a bit for it, and God does it return the favor. We get the Tour Pass, which can be used to fly Bien around as we please. We can even fly to freaking Infini, the final dungeon of the game, right now. Everything there absolutely wrecks you, but I still love that the game even lets you do this. It's ridiculous. But it does create some fun speedrunning potential. Nevertheless, this is a 100% playthrough, and I am not the sequence breaking type myself. I rather just stick to the main path for now. After being done with Bien, I was more than ready to take on Valhalla, but this is where some of my issues come in. So far, the dungeons have been pretty manageable, if a bit repetitive, but Valhalla is just way too big. The maze-like level design is fine for smaller rooms, but when you are given two really big rooms to map out, it does become pretty damn tiring, as you have to constantly go back and forth to make sure you didn't miss a single square, running into countless amounts of random encounters along the way. You could argue that filling out the map is kinda pointless, but the game likes to hide some very vital items in the most random of places. Just here in Valhalla, I could have missed saving Greek, and not gotten an item that is very vital for the end game, but other than that, filling out the map just gives me satisfaction. I play however I want to, damn it, even if it's kinda tedious at times. The game does introduce some dungeon gimmicks in an attempt to keep them fresh, but most of them are superfluous at best. What's the point of these spinning tiles if you could just look at the map and turn around to where you want to go? I don't get this. By this point, Yumiko has also learned the Restart spell, which instantly teleports you back to your last save point, greatly cutting down on the amount of game overs I have gotten. Now, if I was close to dying, I could just cast Restart and heal everyone up at a nearby healing spot. As we move on, we find, holy shit, it's Loki! You kinda just walk into a random room and boom, there's Loki. Hope you literally just healed, because if not, you're probably dead. But after taking care of Loki, we can move on to Mazurka. By this point, the game is starting to get pretty repetitive. The difficulty hadn't really gone up since Daedalus, and you're kinda just doing the same thing over and over. Get to a new floor, fully map it out, kill any enemy you come across, maybe recruit new ones, and move on. It never really ever changes. Mazurka does have its elevator available right out the gate, meaning you could technically skip a lot of it, but it still doesn't change the fact that, again, you're doing a lot of the same stuff. This is also where the game starts getting a lot cheaper. Not harder, cheaper. You start running into some enemies that know this move called the Energy Drain. In this game, Energy Drain levels you down, and not just for the battle, no. You are getting your EXP stolen and lose one of your stat points. This is such a baffling game design choice that literally goes against everything a JRPG is. This game was so good with always making you feel stronger and stronger, but the mere presence of Energy Drain is just bewildering. You could always try to run away from enemies that have it, but running away rarely works in this game, and more likely than not, you will get hit by it. A lot. And then there's this guy, who will offer to sell you the Silver Relief, an item which is crucial if you plan to complete the game, but in exchange for all of your money. All of the money you just earned throughout most of the dungeon, you have to give all of it away. And to add insult to injury, the very next floor has a bunch of shops with expensive equipment, so the game is literally punishing players for being thorough and checking every room. Just how backwards is that? You will eventually get enough money back for everything you need and be done with Mazurka, but that area really just left a bad taste in my mouth more than anything. And then we get to the fucking Sea of Flames. The main gimmick this time is your HP draining with every step you take. Now there is an item that nullifies this, Izanami's robe. Said item actually given to you by Izanami herself actually, but that item is only found very deep into the Sea of Flames. And if you want this, you have to defeat 3 of the game's bosses, and place the orbs gotten from them in the correct spots in the correct order. And as far as I know, nothing in the game tells you which of the orbs are supposed to go where or in what order, so good luck. But even with the robe, the Sea of Flames is still a massive difficulty spike. Up until now, Magnetite and Maka haven't really been much of a problem since Daedalus. But if you want to stand a chance in the Sea of Flames, you are going to need a full team of powerful demons. But the enemies here don't give you enough Magnetite to keep said demons up, meaning you're going to have to grind for Magnetite. And the equipment and healing are also getting ridiculously expensive. Along with summoning demons being as costly as it is, you're also likely gonna need to grind for Maka. No the XP though, with how many enemies here know Energy Drain, you're probably going to lose more levels than gain. This section is just a giant drag. It feels like there's supposed to be an area between Mazurka and the Sea of Flames. You know, kinda like Bien. But no, there isn't. You have to suffer through the entirety of the Sea of Flames as it is. On an unrelated note, Set is also here, I guess. But compared to the challenge of getting to him, he himself is kind of a pushover, especially since I had already found Purski's Nay, which greatly weakened him. I also found Rutz's bottle, which could be used to reveal hidden areas. It initially only seems to be useful for getting to set, but observant players might remember a few suspicious rooms all the way back in Beyond that were unreachable. With the bottle, we can now enter them, and after a long shaft with some annoying pitfalls, we find Nakajima's ultimate weapon, the Hino Kagutsuchi. And man, this thing is absolutely ridiculous. It is way stronger than most other weapons and is guaranteed to hit twice. Maybe it was because of that, but I honestly didn't find the final dungeon, Infinity Palace, all too difficult, especially when compared to the Sea of Flames. Yeah, it was long, but the enemies there gave more than enough magnetite to always keep up a full team of demons, and I was already swimming in Maka by that point. The main gimmick of this place is that it has a bunch of teleporters everywhere, but again, it's kinda more so just annoying rather than actually difficult. To be honest, I was just kinda waiting for the game to be over by then. I feel it did kinda overstay its welcome considering how little story and variety there is. And after my long trek, I finally made it to the one and only Lucifer. Spoiler warning, I guess. Skip to this time code if you want to remain spoiler free. Okay, first of all, love the design, probably my favorite in the game, and secondly, my god what a battle this was. I used up most of my items on my way here, and the last save point was all the way back in the beginning of the dungeon, so let's just say I didn't exactly want to lose here. I already got the item that prevents Lucifer from healing, but the battle was still absolutely brutal. He was just knocking out all of my demons left and right, until eventually all I had left were Nakajima and Yumiko. The only thing I could really do was just keep attacking him while trading heals. It was very close, but Yumiko just barely managed to squeeze in the final hit, and with that, Lucifer was toast. And I have officially beaten Digital Devil Story Megami Tensei. The ending, like most of the plot, is nothing noteworthy. It plays out less like an ending and more like a cutoff point. We even get some cheesy narration warning us that next time, he will come. Now that is some hype, I think. Izanami returns to the heavens, Yumiko cries because anime, the temple collapses as all the weirdos who just felt like living there go the hell away, and Nakajima returns to his good old doggo, which the game is yet to even tell us about. He did have a Cerberus for a bit in the OVA, but in the game it just kinda comes out of nowhere. This ending is so reliant on its cliffhanger that in the SNES version, it puts you right into the second game after the ending of this one finishes. What other game compilation does that? And while the intro of DDS2 does admittedly look way cooler than anything that was in this first game, I think I'll save that for another day. So, what are my overall opinions on this first game? Well, it's pretty complicated. In many ways, DDS was way ahead of its time, with the incredible fusion system, forgiving checkpoints, and lightning-fast battle system. But sadly, it was also behind the time in many ways. It has a paper-thin narrative, repetitive dungeons, and some absolutely dickish design choices. It isn't exactly the most graceful of beginnings, and I can definitely see why many people would not like it. It started the series' infamous reputation for being way too difficult, even if it is honestly not that bad. But at the end of the day, it all boils down to this. Did I have fun? And the answer to that would have to be a wholehearted yes. For the most part. The first half was definitely a lot more solid than the second, but even still, the sense of progression here is some of the best I have seen in the genre. The feeling of finding a cool item, or fusing together an awesome demon with ridiculous stats is amazing. And throughout it all, there is just one thing I felt absolutely radiating out of it, and that is passion. As I said, Atlus released some god-awful games during their early years, but the thing is, those games were clearly just quick cash grabs. Do you think they cared whether Friday the 13th was good or not? Of course they didn't. But this, right here, is clearly something they wholeheartedly cared about. There is a reason why the same company was able to release two games that are radically different in quality during the same year. And that is because one of them was only made so that they could keep their pockets full, and the other was Digital Devil Story Megami Tensei. After the commercial success of the Famicom version of Digital Devil Story Megami Tensei, a sequel was placed in the cards. This time, Atlus were to deviate further away from the original novel, and inject far more of their own identity into this follow-up. And so, on April 6, 1990, Digital Devil Story Megami Tensei 2 was unleashed onto the world. From what I've heard, this seems to be a pretty sizable improvement over the first game. Megaten games with the number 2 seem to always have pretty passionate cult fan bases, and I'm pretty sure this one is no exception. So I am definitely excited to see what Atlus has in store for us this time around. Before getting into it, it should be noted that this video is a follow-up to my original video covering the first Megami Tensei game. It is recommended you watch that video first, or at the very least have knowledge on the original game. Also, just like with the first game, I will be looking at the Super Famicom remake on Megami Tensei The Old Testament, and be calling the Famicom and Super Famicom by their filthy American names. And this should really go without saying, but full DDS2 spoilers are inbound. And with all of that out of the way, I guess all we can really do now is start playing it, and see what Atlus has cooked up for us this time. This is Digital Devil Story Megami Tensei 2. The year is 1990X. It is the end of the era of mankind, and time flows on. But who cares about that? It's time to play video game! Oh goddammit, the save file corrupted. Save files in JRPGs getting corrupted has happened to me plenty of times in nightmares, and I'm only half ashamed to admit that. Luckily, this is just a scripted fake out. Now this here is a weird way to start off a sequel. You begin DDS2 by playing Devil Busters, a sort of game within a game. I love how it gives you a warning telling you that everything that happens in this game is real. Kinda the inverse of those crappy "everything that happens in this game is fake, please don't get offended." But what this really means here is that your EXP will carry over to real life. As in the game, DDS2, not real life. Bleh, you get what I'm saying. This is also where we name our 3 main characters. Now this trio has had a couple of different official names given to them over the years, but for this playthrough I went with the names from the original instruction manual. So we've got our protagonist Hideto, his virtual waifu Rosena who will help him get through Devil Busters, and his IRL best friend Senda. He's pretty cool. We get to assign Hideto and Rosena their starting stats, and off we go. Devil Busters is a recreation of the first game's first dungeon, Daedalus Tower. This initially kinda freaked me out, as I figured it would mean having to go through the entirety of the first game again. But thankfully, Devil Busters is only comprised of said first dungeon, Fiyu. As I said, this is where the game begins, and it basically gives you as little context as possible. We can exit out of Devil Busters and investigate the real world, which is where we learn that apparently demons have completely taken over, and we are now stuck praying at an underground shelter, stockpiling weapons in case demons break through. Well, the human race isn't doing so well, but whatever, none of my problems. Back to video games we go. For now, all we can really do is return to being social outcasts and play Devil Busters with Senda, which also happens to give me an excuse to discuss the gameplay and how DDS2 differs from the first game. And the answer to that is not really. At its core, the battle system here is basically identical to the one found in DDS1. However, DDS2 does introduce a few of its own changes to set it apart from the first game, one of which you likely have noticed a while ago. Yes, the text boxes are now blue instead of green. Game changing. Okay, but for real though, Devil Busters is presented in a more traditional top-down view, as opposed to the standard first-person perspective the series' early entries are known for. The game also supports an overworld very reminiscent of early Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy titles. Now, I personally find the third-person aspect of DDS2 to be a bit of a double-edged blade. On one hand, it does provide some nice variety and allows us to have a better look at the world and its environments. But on the other hand, one of the advantages of the first-person view was the lack of battle and menu transitions. If an enemy appears, boom, it's here, kill it. But with the third-person sections, the screen has to fade out and then fade back into first-person for every single encounter. Heck, it even does that every time you open the menu. In the grand scheme of things, this is a pretty minor issue, but it does rob these sections of the flow the first-person sections have. Though, to be fair, these over-the-top sections only constitute like 15% of the overall playtime at most. So again, not a big deal. Anyways, back in Devil Busters, we beat Minotaur, who's actually far easier here than he was in the first game. However, instead of granting us access to Valhalla, we get the Orb of Silence, which we use on this random statue we found on our way to awaken Pazuzu, this weird bug dude. And this is where we finally get some context as to what the hell is going on. At the end of the 20th century, a nuclear war doomed the whole world to a crisp. All that's left now is nuclear waste and remnants of a civilization gone by. And if that didn't seem bad enough, then how about I tell you that the war just so happened to also create an interdimensional rift. One which connects to the freaking demon world, located at Tokyo of all possible places. Demons were quick to use this as an opportunity to completely overrun and infest the human world, led by their ruler, a powerful demon known as Bale. It's been 35 years since that calamity, and things aren't going much better. Most living humans just inhabit some of the few remaining buildings in the destroyed cities, along with underground nuclear bases such as the one we are currently in. Pazuzu here was sent by God, as in the God, the one from the holy freaking Bible, to send a message to the chosen ones who will save the world. However, Bale stopped him and somehow trapped him within a computer. Really not sure how that works, but whatever, sci-fi bullcrap I guess. As we save Pazuzu, he proclaims Hideto and Senda to be the chosen messiahs who will defeat Bale and save the world from the apocalypse. Hideto is given the demon summoning program, allowing him to summon demons to aid him in battle, and Senda is given the ability to use magic. The celebration is cut short however, as demons have broken through the base, prompting an immediate escape. And so, with the assistance of Pazuzu, it's up to the messiahs, Hideto and Senda, to put a stop to Bale's terror and save mankind. So, yeah, that is quite a lot to take in. Compared to the first game, DDS2 is far more plot heavy. I initially thought it was just going to be a direct continuation of the first game, with Nakajima finally discovering the meaning of life or some crap like that. But no, this plot is completely unrelated to the first games or anything that happens in the novels for that matter. The events of the first game are implied to have taken place around 50 years or so before this one, and of course Devil Busters is an obvious reference to it. However, Nakajima and Yumiko are completely missing in action. But you know, who even needs those two anyways? We've got Hideto and Senda. Two bros, one cause, stop Bale. As we exit the shelter, I have to say I quite enjoy the atmosphere this game gives off. Now, I'm honestly not a huge fan of apocalyptic settings, which I know is a weird thing to say, considering I'm pretty sure most Mega 10 games do revolve around an apocalypse of some sorts. But I personally find them to be a bit too overly pretentious, if that makes any sense. However, I do like the unique spin here, with all of the nuclear waste scattered everywhere. It certainly beats just doing zombies again, that's for sure. And as you'd expect, the music does a great job setting the tension up. Great theme we've got here. With this being a modern setting, some traditions won't really make a lot of sense here. Instead of swords, the shops in DDS2 sell guns, as in actual firearms, which have infinite ammo, baby. Swords are still here, you just need to get them as enemy drops. Guns are used as a sort of secondary weapon of sorts. There's a pretty neat system here where guns are more effective against physical creatures made of flesh, and blades are better for ethereal magic users. On most occasions I found swords to be more effective, but the nice thing is that you can equip your character with both the blade and the firearm at the same time. You get to choose which one to use every turn. I usually went with Hideto using a sword and my secondary character using a gun. Took care of enemies pretty well that way, and I'm not saying demons because in DDS2 you will occasionally be going off against actual humans. Yes, this is an NES RPG where you get to shoot people. And that's another thing I'd like to note. Unlike basically any other NES game I've ever played aside from maybe Final Fantasy II, DDS2 is very distinctly not a kid's game. People die, some of the demons are straight up nude, and I mean, just look at this room. If I saw this as a kid, I can guarantee you this would have given me some serious nightmares. I hate basketball. The NPCs in general are definitely improved this time around. They still mostly just exist to spew out hints, but their dialogue is also often utilized for world building. The first game had a bar where you could talk to a few people, but nothing really noteworthy came out of that. Here though, almost every single town has a bar, and it is surprisingly calming just chilling out and talking to people, for as brief as those moments may be. The minigames are also back from the first game. I do still think these are pretty out of place in this setting, but bleh, I don't mind. Not only are these minigame areas also in more locations here, but there's also a new minigame, Codebreaker, and man, I absolutely adore this thing. It's simple, but very addicting. Pretty much played it every time I had the chance to. Rack's shop returns as well. Yeah, I guess I didn't really talk about this last time, huh? Basically, at some locations in the first game, there was a store you could trade amethyst with in order to receive some items. However, some of these items were necessary for completion, while others straight up hurt you, so it was kinda stupid back then. Thankfully, Rags chilled out since the first game, and the stuff you get from him in exchange for gemstones are just one-time use optional items. Much approved. There are also these weird drug stores where you can get Hideto high on drugs and cheated out of money. I don't really think these have any point in existing, but I could be wrong. Still, things like these help give the world of DDS2 more life. If I would levy one issue against it though is that I think it all kinda blends in too much. Every single town looks the exact same, and the overworld design doesn't have much when it comes to variety. It makes sense with this all being in a big destroyed city, but it also makes it pretty easy to get lost. And I also had a tough time remembering the names of locations, but I think I'll chalk that up to me not being Japanese or living in Tokyo. Luckily the game does do a good job with keeping you on the right track, by using different roadblocks you need certain items for. The whole continent is completely split apart, meaning you'll need to get around using things like underground tunnels, abandoned subways, and my personal favorite, Moras. Giant mutanic sea turtles will carry you across the acid ocean. I'm a simple man to please. I see a cute sea turtle, I like. So yeah, the journey is going pretty swimmingly so far. Hideto and Senda are having the time of their freaking lives. They got this doggo called Orteres to join them who is freaking OP as heck, and even found this nice Solomon's ring, proving them to be the messiahs. I was starting to get pretty into the game at this point. The music, atmosphere, progression, it was all really solid, but a serious wrench is thrown our way as soon as we hear about the Witch of Tokyo Tower. According to Pazuzu, she's a heretic and we have to defeat her. But according to some townspeople, she's actually a pretty nice person. So that's strange. This is something we have never even come close to hearing in the first game. Conflicting ideologies, which is a major theme in DDS2. The messiahs eventually make it to the witch, who is revealed to be Rosena. Hideto's Devil Busters party member somehow reverse isekai'd into the real world. Yeah, this is something that's kinda just never explained or questioned. Rosena tells our heroes that Pazuzu is manipulating them and only using them as a means to defeat Bale, while Hideto, being the complete simp he is, instantly agrees with her and rebels against Pazuzu. Senda remains adamant that Pazuzu's cause is the correct one and Rosena is just trying to trick them. And so Senda leaves, promising that the next time he and Hideto will meet, it will be as enemies. I really like how the game makes you feel weakened after Senda and Hideto split ways. He takes with him Solomon's ring, Orthress, who was probably your strongest demon up until now, and half of your freaking Maka. And I love this because it makes sense. Of course Senda would take half of the money. He and Hideto earned it together. How come literally no other JRPGs do that? Now, to be honest, I did kinda see Senda leaving the party coming. At the beginning of the game, you get to assign Hideto and Rosena their starting stats, but Senda just starts with 8 on everything. Yeah, from that alone, it's pretty easy to see where things will go. After Rosena replaces Senda, the game becomes a lot more non-linear, and you're kinda just left to explore on your own devices. While the first DDS game was kinda just a series of 6 big dungeons in a row, DDS 2 is instead comprised of a lot of smaller town and dungeon areas. It's a lot more traditional if you catch my drift. But sadly, this is also where I'd like to bring up some of my issues. First of all, I'd like to state that looking back, I think I was a little bit too generous when looking at the first DDS game. Not saying I hate it or anything, just that I think I was kinda overselling how fun the gameplay was. The game didn't really give you a lot of incentive to not just spam auto battle for every single random encounter, and with how much random encounters there were, the game did often get pretty boring and monotonous. And what sucks here is that in this regard, DDS2 didn't really fix any of the first game's issues. The moon phase is still a pointless mechanic. Spells have no in-game descriptions, meaning I basically had to check up on the Megami Tensei wiki every time I got a new one. You cannot check your key items, you cannot target enemies when battling big groups. The magnetite system is still one I heavily disagree with, even if, to be fair, it isn't as bad this time around, as magnetite doesn't drain when traveling the overworld, making grinding for it far less of a hassle. But lastly, energy drain. Why is this still here? This is the one thing I was hoping most would be fixed. But nope, it is just as bad here as it was in the first game. Leveling down is not fun. I'd honestly rather go up against an enemy with a one-hit kill move before an enemy with energy drain. At least in the first scenario, I'm not literally losing progress. Most of the gameplay changes DDS2 offers to the Megami Tensei formula are ones I don't really have that strong of an opinion on. Well, I do like the guns, I'll give the game that. But there's also a far bigger focus on equipment this time around, with a lot more slots to equip things into. However, that kinda mostly just means you're gonna need to have more Maka to buy said equipment, because again, Maka is by far the most valuable resource in the game. There are also some items that permanently raise your stats, and I mean, cool? Doesn't really make up for energy drain, sadly. And speaking of sadly, in some regards you are even downgraded compared to the first game. One of Nakajima's most useful abilities was the Demon Analyzer, allowing you to know whether enemies are recruitable or not. However, Hideto doesn't get this ability until around halfway through the game, making negotiation far more of a hassle, though to be fair, I did find that aspect to be more fleshed out this time around. There's a lot more unique dialogue given to certain demons. Unlike the first game, where I usually just threw Maka at the demons to recruit them, this time around I found threatening them to work far better. It's definitely the quickest and most efficient way to get them, while also keeping your bank account in check. Demon Fusion has also been expanded, but let's put a pin in that for now. While getting the Demon Analyzer halfway through the journey may not seem that bad, it should also definitely be noted that DDS DDS2 is a far longer game than the first one. There are a lot more dungeons, a lot more demons, a lot more dialogue, and just generally a whole lot more. It's definitely the beefiest NES RPG I have personally ever played. It's also one of those games I feel gets easier as it goes along. I had to do quite a bit of grinding early on, but by the end of the game things were going pretty damn smoothly. Though this might have to do with Trastart. Trastart was one of the absolute best spells in DDS1, instantly teleporting you to your last save station, and you got it pretty damn early to boot. In DDS2, however, it took me until level 52 to get Trastart on Rosanna, which meant I died a lot. Now the game does let you teleport in between save stations this time around, which is very useful, but without my get out of jail for 6MP card, I was often left pretty screwed deep into dungeons, leaving me with little to no choice but to die, grind for Maka so that I could summon back my demons, and attempt the dungeon again, which in my humble opinion kinda sucks. And this is where I think we ought to talk about something, and it's something that, if you have been watching the footage, you would have likely noticed a while ago. Yes, throughout this playthrough I did use my emulator's fast forward function relatively frequently, and that is mostly because, well, I had more fun that way. And this here is kind of a whole other discussion in it of itself. Does abusing fast forward nullify my ability to critique and analyze this game? The answer here, I believe, is more complicated than many would let on. On one hand, fast forwarding meant I was less engaged with the game due to a lower than intended playtime, and with how fast it made battles go by, it also meant I was likely far more incentivized to grind, which to many would count as cheating. But on the other hand, I was still engaged with the battle system. Fast forwarding just meant I was less bored, and came out of the game more satisfied. At the end of the day, I just decided to stick with my guns for DDS2, but I would like to hear what you guys think about it. Did using fast forward go counterintuitive to the intended experience? Please let me know what you think about it in the comments below, and while you're at it, feel free to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps me out way more than you could possibly imagine. Shameless plug over. At the very least, I can say that while I still enjoyed it in my own maybe illegal way, I did find the battle system in DDS2 to largely be disappointing. But back to where I left off. Hideto and Rosanna set off to stop Pazuzu because reasons. Along the way, a lot of weird stuff happens that's mostly there to flesh out the world and give you things to do in between dungeons. There's this cult where a demon called Balam is brainwashing people to worship him. This is actually pretty annoying because in order to fight him, you need Hideto to have at least 7 intelligence, a stat that increases the power of magic spells. Hideto can't learn any magic, however, so at face value his intelligence points are completely worthless, and you'd be better off investing in different stats. So, after a bit of grinding, I got Hideto's intelligence up to 7 and vow to never increase that stat ever again, which I'm sure will never come back to bite me in the ass. For defeating Balam, you get the Moon Pillar. You actually get quite a few of these pillars for doing these sorts of side activities. Stuff like invading the demon-worshipping Deva Church and defeating their leader on a full moon. Where, by the way, they just recycled this background from the intro of the first game. Just felt like pointing that out, don't tell anybody. And this bizarre demon battling tournament, where you have to pit up your demons against other demons and hope they win. However, the annoying thing is that you don't actually control your demons. The competitors kinda just keep slapping each other until someone falls. It's kinda like the Dragon's Neck Colosseum from Final Fantasy VI if you've ever played that. These pillars don't have any apparent use yet, but they are nice to have around, I guess. Some other happenings include finding the frozen corpse of Lucifer from the first game, meeting up with this businessman called Mr. Suzuki, and getting Solomon's ring back from a lady who apparently met up with Sanda. But finally, let's talk about one of my favorite moments in the whole game. In the dungeon found at Ikebukuro, some people warn you that the Devil's Mouth will punish anyone who tries to take its treasure. However, Hideto, being the complete moron that he is, ignores these warnings and reaches his arm for the treasure anyways. But then the Devil's Mouth closes while Hideto's arm is inside of it, cutting his fucking arm off in the process. Holy shit! With Hideto losing his arm, he can no longer fight, summon demons, and will slowly lose HP. Now this may seem like a pretty bad screw up on Hideto's part, but then you remember an NPC who told you about how he lost his arm and had to get it replaced with a cybernetic arm at the local lab, and when you connect these dots, you know exactly what's happening. You go to the lab and Hideto gets a fucking robot arm, allowing him to go back and take the treasure without fear. How freaking cool is that? Again, I cannot stress this enough. Stuff like this is insane for an NES game. Part of me kinda wishes I was playing that version just to see how ambitious TDS2 truly was. Now, other than letting you hold more demons, Hideto getting a cybernetic arm isn't really ever brought up again and doesn't mean much for the plot. But it just happening is so stupidly metal I can't help but adore it. Though, as you might have been able to tell from my tone, I'm not that huge on Hideto as a protagonist. Combat-wise, both him and Rosanna are practically identical to Nakajima and Yumiko from the first game. It's like the exact same dynamic. So much so that I found myself accidentally referring to them as Nakajima and Yumiko multiple times throughout my playthrough. They're both almost completely silent, which is something I'm honestly not a fan of. I know Nakajima was also silent, but the first game had almost no plot whatsoever, so for me at least it was more excusable there. And also, Nakajima is just funny. Hideto is comparatively just kinda boring, sadly. Deep analysis. But personal grudges aside, our heroes eventually make it to Shinjuku, the location of Pazuzu. After a dungeon with some annoying enemies who put you to sleep all the time, they eventually make it to the top floor, where Hideto is at last confronted by his old friend Senda. And Jesus Christ, what a makeover. Dude, I get that you're an edgelord now, but could you at the very least wear some freaking pants? I mean, it is a really cool design, but morally questionable at the same time. Senda calls Hideto names, we kill our old doggo in 2 hits and Senda runs away. Absolutely thrilling rivalry we've got here. With Senda out of the way for now, it is finally time to face off against Pazuzu, the Deceiver. And wow, this guy is a complete pushover. I managed to beat him with only 1 demon out. Man, I am so good at this game. Anyways, I died to the janitor on the way out. Defeating Pazuzu lets us enter the populated areas of Shinjuku. Nothing really of note here, kinda just another town area with annoying random encounters. But we do get a passageway to Nakano where a guy will give us a secret password letting us enter a previously guarded building in Shibuya. This here is a pretty small optional dungeon with a couple of robot enemies, but at the end of it there's a computer letting us return to Devil Busters. This is unlocked at around the halfway point of the game, so getting to return to the starting area as to measure how much stronger we've become is really cool. This isn't just for shits and giggles either. There are a bunch of new floors we can go to for some great optional loot, including the demon Cerberus, who has been sealed away by Nakajima and Yumiko, left to wait for a worthy hero to lend his legacy to. Even though I just ended up fusing him later, I'm sorry, doggo. And for completing a little side quest involving a couple of kids, with one of them being a demon in disguise, the demon analyzer is unlocked as well. But I already went over that, so moving on. With Pazuzu now gone, all we have left to take care of is Bale. This guard over here who blocks the eastern area of town lets us enter in exchange for Pazuzu's head. And of course we also have to kill him after that because he's a demon. On our way we find this weird temple dungeon with another pillar as a reward for completing it, some annoying floor tiles that damage and poison you, and most importantly, at the outskirts of Bale's castle, we can encounter the one, the only, Jack Frost. The series' mascot making its first ever appearance. He motherfucking ho. Okay, compared to most of its later appearances, it does look quite a bit different here, but it is still really neat to witness the anticlimactic debut of such an iconic character right in front of my eyes. And come on, how could you not like Jack Frost? I mean, it's freaking Jack Frost, the mascot of anti-sex. Unfortunately, we can't get into Bale's castle without permission. This one dude has the balls to block a person with a cybernetic arm, as well as a witch and 4 demons following him. What an absolute chad. But whatever, who even needs a bridge? We've got our good friend Mora to take us across, oh god damn it. So yeah, we get eaten, and have to go through another annoying dungeon. There are a bunch of damage tiles everywhere, and the whole place is structured like a giant maze with a bunch of dead ends. Oh wait, that's kinda just every dungeon in the game, isn't it? Why did I write that? Also, at the end of it, there's this dude who you have to give half of your mecha to in order to escape. You know, I feel like I should be angrier about this. But after having to give someone all of your mecha in the first game, 50% is nothing. Nakajima hardened me. And so our heroes arrive at Bale's castle. As you would expect, it is another dungeon. There isn't anything too noteworthy here other than some annoying tiles that, when stepped on, will teleport you outside. Gotta love that fun game design. As Hideto gets to the top, he is confronted yet again by Senda, the absolute motherfucker. Senda actually admits that what he's doing could be wrong, but it seems that for him, it is too late to go back. He goes to face Bale alone, and leaves Hideto to face off against a bunch of weak random demons. Oh come on, really? We finally confront Senda again, but we just battle a few regular enemies? This isn't even a boss fight. The enemies come out one at a time, so it is literally easier than most random encounters. After that disappointment, we enter Bale's room, and yep, Senda is dead. Completely knocked over, he admits that Pazuzu tricked him and that he was a fool. I would mourn, but Bale is also here, so it's probably best to take care of that first. Bale is yet another pretty easy boss battle. In case it hasn't been made clear yet, the challenge in this game is less so with the actual bosses, and more so with the process of getting to them. If you make it with a full party of 6, then you're pretty much golden. And so Bale is defeated, and is now a frog. A frog! Believe it or not, this here is a very important moment, not only for this game, but by extension for the entire Megami Tensei series. You are given 2 options. You can either kill the frog then and there, or capture it. Now the game has been giving you these minor dialogue options quite a few times up until this point. However, most of the time, only one of them was correct, and picking the wrong one would only kick you out of the room or something. But this, right here, is a choice that could actually affect the ending you receive. Because yes, this game has multiple endings, 2 to be specific. And this here is the first thing that could determine which one you'll be getting. As you would have likely expected, capturing the frog is the option that will keep you on track for the good ending, which is luckily what I did. I mean, come on, I'm not that evil. After taking care of that though, it is sadly time to say goodbye to our old friend Senda. In his dying breath, he gives Hideto the Orb of Sorrow, telling him that the true enemy is in the demon world, which we could get to using a portal located at the center of Tokyo. And lastly, Senda gives us his final words. I just wanted to be a hero. Man, I'm gonna be real with you. Senda is by far the aspect that disappointed me the most in the entire game. And that is because on paper, I fucking love his character. It would be more accurate to call him a rival rather than a villain, always believing himself to be in the right. From his perspective, it's Hideto who betrayed him. However, Senda never really doubted his beliefs. And sadly, by the time he did doubt them, it was already too late for him. His actions were just an extension of a greater power he had no will over. Senda is by far the most fleshed out character I have ever seen in an NES game. And of course his design doesn't really hurt him either. Yes, even the edgelord look, I love it. However, this is where my issue comes in. Senda is great, easily my favorite character in the game, but really he doesn't get much screen time, well, at all. After splitting up with Hideto, you only ever run into him twice. They are both very brief encounters and you don't even get to battle him. Just a few scrawny demons. The NES version does actually have unused data for a Sender battle, but I guess it was caught at some point in development, which majorly blows. Sender doesn't even have that much importance in the plot. If you wanted to, you could very easily just completely write him out of it, and not much would change. He doesn't leave any lasting impact on anything or anyone. You know what? Here's an idea. Why not have Sender be the one to cut Hideto's arm off? It would certainly be a lot cooler than Hideto losing his arm because he was too stupid to notice an obvious trap. And it would also leave you with something to remember Sender by. There is actually a part I do really like, where after Sender dies, Hideto gives him the Solomon's ring back. Now that was admittedly pretty touching, but sadly it was also too little too late for me. If they ever remake DDS2 again, this is the one thing I would want the most to change. Above the magnetite, above energy drain, I need more Sender. But for now, rest tight my sweet prince, you've earned it. With the Orb of Sorrow at hand, we can now head to the collision site located at the middle of the map. This is where all of the pillars we've been collecting finally come into use. In order to progress any further, you need to have collected all 7 of them. Now on my playthrough, I was pretty thorough, so I naturally had all 7 of them by the time I got here. But still, this could potentially be a pretty big pace breaker. With all of the pillars placed at ground 0, an even larger pillar comes out of the ground, and at this point you need to go around it counterclockwise for some reason. I mean, to be fair, the game does tell you about this, but it still feels like a very needless extra step. But then a giant-ass castle rises from the ground, and inside we meet Taira Masukado, this weird purple floating head guy, who will teleport us to the other side. Welcome to the Demon World, also known as the Expanse. When I first got here, my jaw dropped. I was pretty confident that the game would end close to after defeating Bale, but no, there is an entire second overworld. As I said, this game is massive. The Expanse gives off a very depressing atmosphere. While Tokyo was a civilization which was destroyed only recently, the Expanse feels like a place which was doomed long ago, with not much left to its name. Many of the areas are named after negative feelings. We've got stuff like Gloomy Village, Crazy Village, and my personal favorite, Sad Village. Yeah, it's pretty melodramatic, but I still do enjoy the vibe this place gives off. And again, of course, the music greatly helps here. It's about damn time I finally talk about the soundtrack, huh? While I didn't think the DDS1 OST was all that noteworthy, with the exception of a few bangers such as Daedalus Tower, in DDS2 almost all of the music is on par if not better than Daedalus. And heck, thanks to Devil Busters, the Daedalus theme is still in the game. It's a win-win. I already went over how great the map themes are at building atmosphere, but I absolutely cannot ignore just how hard all of the dungeon and battle themes slap. There aren't many of them, but the ones that we do have are all absolute gold. The NES version of the game actually had a special chip built in which provided it with 4 additional audio channels. For that reason, the NES game has what is commonly agreed to be the superior OST. But that's not to say the SNES soundtrack is bad, not at all. They might be a bit slower and softer, but the tracks are still really good. Though I did still decide to use the NES music for this video as I do think it to be superior. Continuing along with the Expanse, unlike Tokyo where we were collecting pillars, this time our goal is to collect orbs, which, just like the villages, are named after negative emotions. All of the landmasses are separated by a sea of blood, and each of the orbs you collect will allow you to travel to a different landmass. So okay, early on I was doing pretty solid in the Expanse. There were some annoying caves but nothing too hard. Eventually I made it to this room with a giant water pool. I figured I would need some kinda key item to take care of whatever's in there, so for now I made a mental note of that and moved on. Flash forward to an hour later. There was this wall of fire blocking a pathway near Crazy Village, and this is where I finally got stuck. I had absolutely no idea what to do or where to go. And so, after over an hour of painful back and forth, I caved in and looked up a walkthrough. And I'm not gonna lie, the solution here kinda pissed me off. You see, in DDS2, there are 2 fusible demons you are absolutely required to obtain in order to beat the game. Ondine and Gnome. Ondine to dive into the aforementioned pool to get the Flood Tide Orb, which you could then use to go past the Wall of Flames, and Gnome to open a lock for a dungeon. You also need a sylph for a side quest, but that's not required, so it's not as bad. I absolutely hate the game requiring you to have certain demons. Now, NPCs do hint you in the right direction, telling you what demons you might need. However, the issue here isn't not knowing what demons to fuse, but rather not knowing how the fuck you're supposed to fuse them. Ondine and Gnome can only be acquired through fusion, meaning that unless you have a walkthrough on hand, or by some miracle know how to fuse these demons together, you'll have to do a bunch of trial and error right near the end of the game. I mean, come on! Even DDS1 didn't have something as stupid as this. But I guess this is as good a time as any, huh? Let's finally rip the bandage off and talk about the fusion system in DDS2. Oh boy. Okay, so at face value, the fusion system here isn't much different from the one in the first game. You take 2 demons, you put them together, you get a new demon. That much is still the same, but a few things have been altered in order to make the process of fusion more complex. And I honestly feel a bit mixed about it. Let's start with the most obvious new addition, Triple Fusion. Now at face value, this here is pretty damn awesome. What's better than 2 demons together? 3 demons together. And while this may seem really useful, I sadly feel that Triple Fusion is a concept that sounds a lot cooler than it actually is here. Only demons who are allied good can be triple fused, which I think is a neat idea. But the issue here is that Triple Fusion barely ever breeds something worthwhile. Most of the Triple Fusion results I got near the end of the game were of demons who are severely lower level than all 3 of the demons I would have had to sacrifice in order to create them. Do you want to know how many times I used Triple Fusion in my entire playthrough? 1. I only used Triple Fusion 1 time in this 30-hour plus long game, and to be fair, it did feel pretty damn awesome to finally pull it off. The demon I got for it was Odin, which I later fused with Ifrit to get freaking Michael, who was so good I kept him with me until the end of the game. He had the rare spell Samericharm, which can revive dead party members, making him a great backup option. However, even outside of Triple Fusion, there were many times where fusing 2 demons would just result in something weaker than both of the demons sacrificed in the process, which heavily blows. So, why does fusion create so many underwhelming results? You may be asking in an accent far better than mine. Well, that's because DDS2 heavily wants you to use its brand spanking new fusion mechanic. elementals. You see, in DDS1, many demons were just not compatible with each other, and would result in a Dryad when fused, who is one of the weakest demons in the game. However, in DDS2, fusing two non-compatible demons will instead result in one of 10 different elementals. Whichever elemental they'll result in is determined by their combined average level. Now, the elementals aren't particularly useful in combat, but fusing certain elementals together with certain demon types could potentially result in a very strong party member. This right here is a system I think is already flawed on paper, and it falls even flatter in execution. Firstly, it is nice that the game upgrades your maximum demon capacity from 7 to 10. It definitely helps here a lot. But the underlying issue here is that once you use a demon for fusion, it's gone. The only way to get it back is to either somehow fuse it, or go all the way back to where you got said demon from, hope to encounter it, and then hope it will agree to join you. This game is where I would first coin the term demon fodder. Party members you'll only be recruiting so that you could fuse them, and unless you're willing to load your save a bunch to try out every single possible combination, you will have to grind for demons a lot if you plan to utilize fusion, and it just gets tiring. You wouldn't believe how much of my playtime was dedicated to either running in circles trying to encounter certain demons, or fucking around with menus at the Cathedral of Shadows. Now, I will give the game credit in that there is actually an NPC early on who will teach you how the fusion system works, but also I'm gonna need to dock some points here. Firstly, this tutorial is terrible, at least in the translation I played. I had to go back through and read it multiple times before I could finally actually understand it. And secondly, they put it very early on in the game, yet it teaches you mechanics that won't come into play until the very end of the journey. For example, you get told about cursed items, which are pieces of equipment you can't unequip, meaning that if you decide to use them, then you're basically fucked. However, there are only 2 cursed items in the entire game, and they don't show up until as late as Bale's fucking castle, meaning that by the time you finally find the cursed item, you would have probably forgotten they even exist and will be confused as to why you can't unequip them. So I personally believe it wasn't the greatest of game design choices. But back to the fusion system. What I think might just be the most idiotic thing about it is that you could very easily go through the entire game without ever using a fused demon in combat once. Not only are the demons you recruit in the wild just as if not more capable than whatever you can fuse together, but in DDS2 there are quite a few demons who will join you for just completing side quests, or even playing the game normally. And these demons are easily some of the best in the entire game, making all of that time I spent fusion grinding almost completely worthless. I would say that DDS2 is a better game than 1 in most regards, but an area where that game easily outshines this one is the fusion system. It may have been far simpler and kinda brain dead, but it never felt pointless. I couldn't imagine playing through the first game without using fusion. Everything about it was built around that mechanic. It was the cornerstone of everything. In DDS2, however, I would prefer to play with as little fusion as possible, which is a shame because there are a lot of really cool ideas here, especially triple fusion, but sadly, in my opinion, the fusion system in DDS2 is completely broken. And if you want one final nail in the coffin, remember that side quest with the sylph I talked about earlier? Well, for completing it, you get the Sword Knight, one of the best demons in the game. After getting him though, the game tells you that you should fuse it with the sylph for an even better demon. The demon you get for fusing the Sword Knight and the sylph, however, is significantly lower level, weaker, and worse than the Sword Knight in almost every way. And that, I feel, speaks louder than any argument I could make here. So yeah, I apologize for slightly going off for a bit there. I'd like to reassure everyone that I still overall enjoyed the game. It's just that I feel a lot of its mechanics are fundamentally flawed. But having finally gotten that out of the way, I believe it's about time we start wrapping this up. And I bet all of you just collectively checked the video's progress bar. In the Expanse, our heroes eventually run into Izanami, only to sadly find that they are too late, as she has already passed away. However, luckily enough, they later go on to find the revival incense, which, big shocker, could be used to revive her. Doing so doesn't provide any immediate reward in the NES version. However, this is where the Old Testament does do something that is admittedly really cool. You see, in the SNES version of DDS1, you can find a silk thread, which you can later give to Izanami. However, doing that didn't seem to provide any reward whatsoever. Until now, that is. For giving Izanami the silk thread in DDS1, you get Izanami's robe in DDS2. Just how awesome is that? Having the progress from the first game carry over to the sequel. It's basically stop and swap before stop and swap. And this actually works because both games are on the same cartridge. Very big fan. There's a similar thing early on where you can get Nakajima's old membership card, which when given to Rag will award you with a Hydran, an item that fully heals HP, MP, and all status conditions. Wow, that is so good, I never used it. Come on, I was saving it for the final boss. The same final boss where I forgot I even had it. And to be fair, Izanami's robe isn't that useful either. Just like in the first game, it protects you from damage tiles, but by the time you get it, there aren't many of those left in the game, so it is a bit superfluous, but still appreciated. Back on track though, we're at around the last third of the journey, and this is kinda where the dungeons start having more frustrating gimmicks. When compared to the first game, I do mostly prefer the dungeon design in DDS2, mostly due to it not having a bunch of stupidly large floors like in Valhalla and the Sea of Flames. But let me tell you, that statement did kinda start to get challenged when I got to this point. How about a dungeon where Hideto's computer just randomly malfunctions sometimes? Oh, and there should be a dungeon where Rosena gets captured and you have to get through all of it with just Hideto. That would be fun. And of course, we can't go without a dungeon where half the floor tiles are just pitfalls, which, when stepped on, will drop you to the previous floor. And said pitfalls aren't even marked on your map, meaning you have to memorize the entire layout of the dungeon. That totally won't take an hour to finish and will be the worst fucking dungeon in the game. Okay, to be fair though, at least this one is optional. For finishing it you get Lucifer's armor, which is the best piece of body equipment in the game. However, this is where DDS2 decided to pull off one less annoying trick. You see, only Hideto can equip Lucifer's armor, but in order to do so, he needs to have at least 25 base intelligence, which, again, is a status that's practically worthless for him, and they do the same thing with Lucifer's sword later on. Again, the best weapon in the game, but you need Hideto to have 20 intelligence to use it. Now this is honestly not too bad. While Lucifer's sword is still superior, the Hinokagutsuchi, which was the best weapon in the last game, is still here. Just gotta go in a circle around this statue, and it is just as good as ever. The armor as well is honestly not all that necessary. However, this does still feel like a cheap trick. I would still rather just keep Hideto stupid, though I do wonder if his stupidity may have robbed on the game's programming. It was starting to get pretty glitchy near the end, doing stuff like giving dungeons incorrect color palettes, and fucking around with my map, making it seem like I've been to areas I haven't gone to yet, and haven't been to areas I've already went to. But I guess the game just saw how freaking long this video was going, and just wanted me to finish it up. So let's finally put the gameplay aside and discuss the end game. On their journey through the Expanse, Hideto and Rosena eventually encounter the great bug god Beelzebub. However, Bale the Frog jumps to stop them, as it is revealed that him and Beelzebub were once one great god known as Babylonia. However, the one true god split them into two lesser demons, but with them reuniting, they can finally come together again into Baal. And, I mean, not gonna lie, this is kind of a downgrade. Makes for a great healer though. And so with Bal on their side, our heroes travel to the remote island, which contains a small dungeon that has them once again run into Izanami, who teleports them to Lucifer's temple located to the east. And it is there where the 5 orbs they've collected come together into the one almighty Orb of Hope, which will let them teleport to Lucifer's castle. A lot of teleporting going on. And okay, I know I said I'll shut up about the gameplay for a bit, but my god, the first floor of Lucifer's castle is absolutely terrible. It's just a bunch of copy-pasted spinning floors and dead ends. And as someone who fully maps out everything, I hate this place. Back on track though, our heroes soon come face to face with the resurrected Lucifer. How Lucifer came back after dying in the first game is another one of the many things that's never really explained. So make of that as you will. Now you would normally have to fight Lucifer now, but with Bal at our side, we're allowed to make a few negotiations. And this is where we get a bit of a plot reveal. Lucifer tells that in ancient times, he was the one to bestow wisdom onto mankind. However, God, wanting to keep his creations under control, punished Lucifer by casting him down onto Earth, where the humans, due to their want for intelligence, actually worshipped Lucifer over God, and this absolutely pissed God off. So much so that he cast down literally every other god, including Lucifer, into the expanse, and turned them into demons. I would say my god, but that's not really appropriate right now. After that lore dump, Lucifer requests Hideto and Rosena to help him defeat the one true god, and bring back the golden age for the humans and old gods. Their first step? Defeat Satan, who, as you would expect, is in Tokyo. I mean, duh. You get Lucifer as a party member here, and he is obscenely overpowered, basically making the entire rest of the game a complete joke. And again, makes fusion even more useless of a mechanic. This here though is an aspect of the plot that does admittedly bother me. I don't really feel that the depiction of Lucifer we see here really matches with how we saw him in DDS1. Back then, he was the main villain, threatening to overtake and rule the human world. But in DDS2, he's more so portrayed as a sympathetic figure who only wants the best for mankind. For me, this doesn't really make much sense. I could say a similar thing about Bale, who just like Lucifer, previously tried to conquer the human world, but is now painted as its savior. And the game never really addresses the sudden shift these two characters go through, which makes this whole thing feel a bit rushed. Nevertheless, I do still think the game manages to get across what it's trying to say here. So let's go to wreck some goddess. Back in Tokyo, we return to Suzuki's company. This is another part I did have to Google, as nothing in the game actually tells you where in Tokyo to go, which is stupid, but whatever. We ask to meet with Suzuki, but the guard instead sends us into the area with the strongest enemies in the entire game. How considerate of him. We also come across this weird head who tells us President Suzuki isn't who he seems to be, as he turned this man into what we see him now. So going back to Suzuki's office, we once again ask to see the man, but then the guard turns into a demon, and we kill it. Suzuki shows up and offers us a drink, but I mean, did you see that guy from earlier? No thank you. It's then revealed that Suzuki is actually Satan! Say what? And so we kill him. And that lets us get the best gun in the game. Nice. But firepower isn't what we're here for. We're here for God. Entering the final corridor, we get a few final warnings telling us to turn back. But just as Senda did earlier, we have come too far to back up now. Ladies and gentlemen, this is God, also known as YHVH, a giant screaming blue head. If you are wondering why he's called that, it's because the letters YHVH translate to Yud Hey Vav Hey in Hebrew, which is what God is called in the Hebrew Bible, and it is a name set to bring great curses to anyone who would utter it. Jehovah! Man, let me stress it again, this is an NES game. Despite everything he has done, YHVH is still willing to give Hideto a chance at redemption, offering him to forsake Lucifer and serve by his side. This here is something really nice. If you stick to the good route, then you actually get to choose which ending to get, which means you can see both of them in a single playthrough, and that is a lot better than having to play through the whole game twice. Let's start with the bad ending to get it out of the way. In this ending, Hideto backstabs Lucifer at the last minute, because he's an asshole, as YHVH sends him, as well as all of the other demons, to burn in hell for the rest of eternity, while promising to give Hideto and Rosena a world of eternal bliss, the Millennial Kingdom. And then they become gods, I guess. Yeah, this ending is left pretty damn vague. It isn't necessarily a bad ending, but it's clear something is still missing. Luckily though, we have time travel powers. So, going back to the good route, Hideto decides that he has had enough of this bullshit and goes against YHVH, who promises Hideto and Rosena will burn in hell for all eternity. Like most of the bosses in this game, YHVH is honestly not all too difficult. He has a lot of HP and completely resists magic, but I mostly do damage in the form of physical attacks anyways, and have both Rosena and Bal to keep the party alive. So while it did take some time, I was able to defeat YHVH and bring salvation to mankind. YHVH, shocked having been defeated by his own creations, tells our heroes that he is only a part of the entity that controls the endless cosmos, and that in time he will recreate his body. But for now, humans have earned freedom. Back at the base from the beginning of the game, we hear that all of the demons have disappeared. You can now also attempt to play Devil Busters again, only to discover that the game has mysteriously ended, and that it was created by the one and only A. Nakajima, baby! Imagine making a video game about yourself, only Nakajima. It's a bit melancholic to say goodbye, but here we are. Hideto and Rosena exit the shelter, while made aware that in time, a new evil will inevitably arise, are still left hopeful that in due course, humanity will be able to restore itself and achieve true peace. And that is where DDS2 closes off. This is a plot that's very heavy on its themes and symbolism. Many aspects are left intentionally vague on purpose. A lot of the story here is just what you make of it, so please keep in mind that what I'm gonna say here is just what I personally took from the plot, whether it was the intentional or unintentional way of looking at it. I should also note that I likely have missed many of the religious references, which may have helped piece things together. Still though, I believe this story does stand on its own, separated from these connections. If you see this story differently than me, feel free to share your own takes in the comments. I'd love to be able to talk about this, but without further ado, here is my take. The story of DDS2 is definitely something else. The amount of sheer unadulterated ambition here is off the charts, and possibly even detrimental in a few points. I could genuinely see some people being offended by its portrayals of some religious figures, with it taking God, the central figure of the majority of the Holy Bible, and portraying him as the sort of maniacal villain. When you really think about it though, God being portrayed as a figure to be feared is far from something new. Heaven and hell are concepts far engraved into the mind of your average Christian. The idea that when you die, your sins will be judged, and if your soul is deemed unholy, you'd be cast to suffer for the rest of eternity. That is scary, and shows God as a relatively relentless, unforgiving figure. Or just look at something like Noah's Ark, a story about how God doomed almost all of humanity for being sinful creatures. That right there, through context other than religion, could easily be seen as an action of a villainous figure. I'm sure that for many people, taking a plot like this seriously may be a bit tricky. Stuff like Satan being a Japanese businessman is ridiculous, and the mix of so much religion and sci-fi is a bit jarring. Personally, as someone with a pretty flexible suspension of disbelief, I can take this stuff at face value, even if I know that many people will not be able to get into it. Ultimately though, the main theme of DDS2 is clearly the conflict of law versus chaos. Do you choose to obey the golden rule in order to live a safe if controlled life? Or do you want to achieve true freedom, if for the price of an uncontrolled, messy civilization? At the end of the day, DDS2 pretty clearly sides with the latter. While the bad ending isn't necessarily bad, the good ending is a lot more definitive and clearly painted as the better of the two. And in that regard, I do wish the game was able to delve deeper into these themes. It less so explores them and more so puts them into question. I think it would have been better if both endings were given more or less equal value. Regardless of your route, you end up having to fight Satan. So I think it would have made more sense if Satan was only a boss in the bad route, with him still looming over the end of the good route. I do definitely get the appeal of a single, more or less definitive ending, but I also feel that said ending is a little bit too black and white for my liking. While I still take issue with some of its characters, this is pretty clearly not a character-driven story. The focus here is on the themes. I do personally prefer more character-focused narratives, but I don't think one approach is inherently better than the other. They both have different values which could be approached in different ways, but to conclude this, I'll stop beating around the bush. Looking at this plot as something played in 2022, it's pretty average. There isn't much dialogue and some things are left pretty black and white. However, if we're looking at DDS2 as an NES game released in the year 1990, this is absolutely one of the most monumental plots ever put into a video game. I can't even think of anything that even comes close. At the time, video games didn't have moral ambiguity, questions about human existence, and heavy-handed usage of themes. When looking at it from those lenses, DDS2's plot is nothing short of a masterpiece. Something I will remember for years to come. And that was Digital Devil Story Megami Tensei 2. And wow, what a journey. At the end of the day, despite me being a bit lukewarm towards many of its gameplay elements, I did really enjoy DDS2. Gameplay aside, as a sequel, it was just about everything I could have hoped for and more. The story, characters, music, settings, everything here is infinitely more compelling than the first game's lukewarm attempts at them. I will say that the gameplay definitely could have been better. While I did enjoy it in my own way, I sadly feel it is tied down by a pretty broken central mechanic. It does kinda suck, as it prevents me from being able to fully recommend this game to people. It has very niche appeal nowadays, but I also think that DDS2 should not be approached as a game. It should be approached as an experience. A forgotten piece of history that was doing things way ahead of the curve. If you appreciate Legacy and can look at it with the proper mindset, then I think you would be able to see just how truly ambitious DDS2 was, because more than anything, this game absolutely defined the franchise. It's what took Megami Tensei from a random licensed game to its own unique juggernaut. Without this game, we wouldn't have had this, or this, or this, or even this. But most important of all, we wouldn't have had this. Hee-ho. And that was the end of the Digital Devil Story duology. And wow, this was way longer than I thought it would be. But hey, I guess a long game deserves a long video. It's probably gonna be quite a while before I feel like tackling Mega 10 again. But when I will be back, it will be with the game that started the main series we know today, Shin Megami Tensei for the SNES. As always, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, have a good one.